Good evening, Ven Amarasiri.
Good evening, everyone. Hi, Nitya. Welcome back. Just give me one moment.
Sure.
How do I? Great. Um, can you see my screen now?
Yes, your screen is visible.
Okay, I think Richard's saying no. Richard, can you see it? Yeah, okay, great. Okay, welcome everyone. Third week of the 6 week uh, story time at the Sarana, whatever you want to call it. But it's been lovely so far. We're halfway through, another half to go. So before we move on, I thought I'll just draw your attention to this picture that we see every week. And this is an actual mural from the wall of a cave in Ajanta in Maharashtra, Western India. And these paintings are probably on the walls are probably 1,200 years old. And there's one artist who's now taking photographs of them and recreating them. So I thought this one was particularly nice, and I kind of use it as a cover slide. So as we always do, let's think of all our teachers and express our gratitude and express our deepest respects by chanting the Itipiso. Itipiso Bhagavārahants Sambuddho Vijjacharana Sampanno Sugato Lokavidho Anutaro Purisadhamma Sarati Satta Devamanu Sanang Buddho Bhagavati Sava Katho Bhagavata Dhammo Samditiko Akadiko Ehipasiko Opanayiko Pachatang Vedita Bhovinyohi Panno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Ujupati Panno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Nyaya Pati Panno Bhagavato Sangho Samichi Patipanno Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Yadidan Chatari Sayugani Atta Purisa Pukkalaye Sa Bhagavato Savaka Sangho Pahuneyo Pahuneyo Dakineyo Anjali Karaniyo Anuttarang Punyaketam Lokasati. Okay, so this evening we're going to be talking about Venerable Ananda. And Venerable Ananda is a character who's really close to my heart, certainly really close to the hearts of many, many monks and lay people I know. And there's an interesting story. When Ajahn Amaro was visiting here, he described Lumpo V as everybody's favorite uncle. Venerable Ananda was kind of like that. He was everybody's favorite. So we'll talk about Venerable Ananda, all of his, a lot of the history around him. And when you speak of Venerable Ananda, the foremost quality that stands out in mind is Saddha. So his dedication to the Buddha, his dedication to the teachings, his dedication to the Sangha, and the service he performed as an expression of that dedication. So we'll talk about Saddha, and then we'll talk a little bit about how the Buddha himself describes Saddha. We'll talk about how Venerable Ananda was a personification of Saddha. Then we'll go on to the more historical pieces, his role in the Sangha, few interesting stories, the kind of untrammeled praise that the Buddha has for Venerable Ananda. Oh, vignettes appears twice, sorry. And then finally, Buddha's words on Venerable Ananda. So in contrast to the previous weeks, when we looked at the lives of Venerable Sariputta and Venerable Mahamoggallana, both of them attained Mahaparinibbana before the Buddha's Mahaparinibbana. So, or they attained Parinibbana and the Buddha attains Mahaparinibbana. Venerable Ananda, however, outlives the Buddha. So we wouldn't have that slide where the Buddha talks about, and he also gets enlightened after the Buddha passes away. So there aren't any words of Buddha praising Venerable Ananda's awakening, or any words where the Buddha talks about Venerable Ananda's passing. But then there are lots of other things that the Buddha says about Venerable Ananda. So when we talk of Saddha as a quality, right, as a cultivation, it's very often translated as devotion. It's often translated as faith. But there's something more to it. There is a component of dedication. There's a component of conviction. And there's also a component of upholding that conviction, upholding that dedication. So it's not, it's the work of a lifetime, or it's the work of many lifetimes, right? Where you constantly work on it, you refine it, you allow it to express itself in many, many ways. So conviction, dedication, and all that is being upheld in one's heart. So it's a very felt thing. We'll talk about that a little later. The Buddha also makes it very, very clear, and the Tipitaka makes it very, very clear that Saddha should not be amulika. And this is the difference between Saddha and the Pali canon, and Saddha, or this idea of belief or faith or devotion in other contexts, where mula means root. So Saddha should not have, or let's put it this way, Saddha should always have a root. So the Buddha talks of two types of Saddha, Amulika Saddha and Akaravati or Dasanavati Saddha. Amulika Saddha is Saddha that does not have a root, that is not seated in anything, that is not the result of a certain realization, the result of a certain conviction. So you could kind of say that Amulika Saddha is like blind belief or blind faith. Akaravati, Akara means reasoning, and Dasanavati, Dasana means to see or to view. So Saddha, when it becomes, or when Saddha arises as a result of reasoning, or as a result of something becoming apparent, then that is the Saddha we have to cultivate. And that is when Saddha is accompanied by wisdom. And this is very important in the whole context of the Tipitaka. Whenever the Buddha talks about Saddha, it's not a blind faith, it's not a blind surrendering, it's not belief without reason, it's not something that doesn't have a base, doesn't have a foundation, because the base and the foundation is the wisdom and the realization and the vision of something that has happened. And the Saddha responds to compassion, the compassion of the Buddha, the compassion of our teachers. Okay, and how is a teacher compassionate to his students, his or her students? A teacher is compassionate to his or her students by watching them, by seeing what their weak spots are, by seeing what their strengths are, encouraging their strengths, and at the same time, encouraging them to work on their weak spots. So as this happens, as this rapport with the Dhamma, with the teachings, with the teacher, as this rapport progresses, one begins to see the compassion. And this compassion leads to this awakening of say, reason or wisdom, right? And obviously, the expression of Saddha is in following the teacher's teachings. So if you take the example of the Buddha, following the Dhamma and the Vinaya, is how one's Saddha is expressed. And if you really want to honor your teacher, whoever the teacher may be, as a living personage, the way we honor our teachers is by putting their teachings into action, by imbibing it, right? And finally, it gives rise to a lot of confidence. So panya or Saddha, always accompanied by panya, it always responds to karuna, and it gives rise to confidence. Very often, Saddha itself is expressed or translated as confidence. So this is like a general kind of description of Saddha. Now, let's see how the Buddha talks about it. So I've kind of picked up a few suttas. The sourcing is given in the last slide as usual. So the Buddha says that Saddha is the seed. So he says if Nibbana is the fruit, Saddha is the seed. Powerful, right? Very, very powerful. So this appears in a sutta called the Kasi Bharadvaja Sutta. And Bharadvaja is this farmer. He sees the Buddha going on alms round, and he tells the Buddha, I till my land and I eat. Why don't you till too, so that you can eat? So the Buddha says, of course I till. I'm a farmer. I till the land. I till. So he says, okay, well, how do you describe it? I don't see you tilling anything. How do you say you're a farmer? So he says, well, the field that I work in is the field of merit, punyakheta. The seed that I sow is my faith, my conviction, that is saddha. The meditation that I do, the tapas, is the rain. My conscience and concern, hiri and otapa, are the yoke and the plowshare, and goes on and on and on, right? But the important point being, he starts with saddha. And we very often see that, right? Last week, we spoke about how sila supports samadhi, how samadhi supports panya. How does sila arise? Sila is nothing but the expression of saddha. Unless one had confidence, unless one had a certain amount of trust in saying that, okay, and unless we can see for ourselves how the 5 precepts work, we're not going to keep the 5 precepts, right? So saddha is the seed. The Buddha also describes saddha as the tree. And he says, if there's a crossroad where 4 busy highways meet, and there is this huge tree, and this tree, to the traveler, it provides shade. For birds, it provides a home. It has fruit that nourishes humans and animals. Just like that, a person with saddha stands like a tree, offering shade, comfort, nourishment, nutrition. So it's beautiful, beautiful. He also says that saddha is the foundation for all higher attainments. And that just goes back to what we were saying earlier, right? About how without saddha, one is not inspired to cultivate sila. And so sila is the expression of saddha. Saddha is the starting point. We start with that trust. We start with a certain conviction, and also not blind trust or conviction. We try it out. We reason with the Four Noble Truths. We experiment with the Noble Eightfold Path. And then we see how these precepts actually manifest and change our lives. And that's when Saddha arises. And we use that as the foundation for everything else. Buddha also says that Saddha is the wealth or the treasure. There's a list of 7 treasures, and Saddha is one of them. And he also says that Saddha is one of the 4 gateways to the city of Nibbana. Right? And in one of the suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya, he very beautifully says, Tasma Saddhena Silena. Therefore, with Saddha and with Sila, Pasadang Dhamma Dasanam. It's so gladdening to see the vision of Dhamma arise as a result of Saddha and Sila. Anuyunjanti Medhavi. So very often this line is translated as, thus the wise practice. But the word yunjati doesn't mean practice. It's almost as dry as toast to call it practice, right? Yunjati means to engage with. It means to hold. It means to grapple with. It means to taste, to relish, to enjoy, to make your own. So it's very, very guttural, it's visceral, it's heartfelt, it's tangible in the body. Anuyunjanti Medhavi. And hence the wise experience. Sarang Buddhana Sasananti. And Sarang Buddhana Sasananti is translated as following the Buddha's way. But Sara, the word Sara is very, very powerful. Sarana comes from the word Sara. And Sara means to flow. Like how water has a path of least resistance. Like how when an archer releases an arrow, the arrow reaches its target. That is Sara. And so Sarana, which is a refuge, is when we ourselves flow into something. Right? So Sarang Buddhana Sasanti, with Saddha and with Sila, you actually taste it, you engage with it, you relish it, you enjoy it. That's what wise people do. And by doing that, they follow the teaching of all the Buddhas. Sarang Buddhana Sasananti. Not just this Buddha, but all the Buddhas. So I mean, this is one part of the suttas that I really, really appreciate and enjoy. I don't know if I've done justice to it, but I thought I'll share it with you. So now we come to Venerable Ananda, and Venerable Ananda is supposed to have had 5 aspects in which he was absolutely excellent. And because of these 5 aspects, the Buddha chooses Venerable Ananda as his attendant. And as a result of these 5 aspects, Venerable Ananda's role in the Sangha kind of evolves into what it is. Or Venerable Ananda has this niche in the Sangha because of these 5 strengths, 5 aspects. And these 5 aspects, we'll see, are a result of Venerable Ananda's Saddha, a result of his dedication, his commitment, his devotion to the Buddha as a teacher and to the Dhamma as the teachings. So the first one is Bahussuto, which means he has heard a lot, right? And not only has he heard, but after hearing, he remembers. So he becomes a Satiman, Satimanto, one who remembers. And so he hears, he remembers. Not only does he hear and remember, but he remembers it in the proper sequence, Gatimanto, right? So listening, remembering in the proper sequence, Dithimanto. So here Ditti is different view. Samma Ditti, it's not that Ditti. Here Ditti means a a kind of energy, a kind of dedication, kind of organization, right? So he's extremely committed, having remembered the sequence, he puts that sequence in a certain order, and he puts forth a lot of energy in actually preserving it, the Timanto. And finally, one thing that's Patama Upatako. So he is the ultimate attendant, the first among attendants, right? So these are, by the Buddha's own words, these are 5 of Venerable Ananda's traits or characteristics that gives him this niche within the sasana, within the Buddha's sangha. And we see without Saddha, none of this is possible, right? If he did not have commitment to his teacher, he couldn't have been his attendant for 25 years. First of all, he wouldn't have been encouraged to listen. So he listens to everything. In fact, at one point, he says, in the Ananda Theragatha, he says, I have heard and memorized 82,000 teachings of the master and 2,000 teachings of his disciples. And hence I have in my memory 84,000 teachings. So, we're talking of a super duper computer here. Bahussuto, he has heard. And not only does he hear, he remembers. And he remembers the sequence, he applies energy, he organizes them, and then he serves the master. Right? So then we move on to Ananda's role in the Sangha. Venerable Sariputta was known as the Dhammasenadipati or Dhammasenapati. Venerable Ananda is known as the Dhamma Bandagarika. And Bandagarika means a treasurer. Dhamma Bandagarika is the treasurer of the Dhamma. And therefore, he protects the Dhamma. He grows the Dhamma. He organizes it. He encourages it to multiply, right? Any role that you can think of for a treasurer applies to Venerable Ananda. And it's interesting to note that there are only 2 monks who were given titles by the Buddha. The first was Venerable Sariputta. Second is Venerable Ananda. One was the Dhammasenadipati, the marshal of the Dhamma. And the other is Dhamma Bandagarika. Sorry, I keep reverting to Sanskrit. But in Pali, it's Bandagarika, which means the treasurer. Okay? And we also saw how he was foremost in 5 aspects. And he was the Buddha's aide-de-camp, in the sense that he says, for 25 years, I followed the master. As a shadow never departs, I have never let the master alone. Right? So he was always there. And that is the meaning of the word upataka. So for us monastics, we all have to serve a senior monk, right? We all have to serve here. In this case, we serve Lumpur Viradhammo, we serve Ajahn Pabro. And so any action that we do in service of them is called upataka. And upataka means to be stationed close by, right? To be available, to serve. So he was the Buddha's aide-de-camp. There are many instances where the Buddha entrusts him with difficult tasks, with tasks that are delicate. He very often delegates Ananda to teach. Ananda very often deals with the other members of the Sangha. Venerable Ananda is also the source. He's kind of like a liaison. He's kind of the source of information for the Buddha. So he tells the Buddha what's going on, keeps the Buddha informed. So he's also an information system. So all of these, right? Second in command. And of course, he was the bridge. Because of his being the Buddha's second and Buddha's attendant, come the Buddha's secretary, he took that role very, very seriously. In fact, it is said that he never turned someone away unreasonably. Right? So if someone wanted to see the Buddha, he would always make sure he would arrange the Buddha's appointments. He would organize the Buddha's schedule. If someone comes to meet the Buddha, he would organize a teaching, he would organize an audience. And so he himself says of himself in the Theragatha that he was always the bridge and never the barrier. Right? Very often we find that all of these celebrities have all these barriers around, right? And their job is to make sure no one meets the celebrity. This is the total opposite. The Buddha is there. A lot of people come to meet him. Ananda's job is to make sure all these people actually get to meet the Buddha. So he's the bridge, not the barrier. It would have been a daunting task because kings and queens and aristocrats and nobility and common folk and monks and nuns and, people from different ascetic lineages, people from within the Sangha, all of these people would have come and they would have wanted to meet the Buddha. So it fell on Ananda to kind of facilitate all that, facilitate all of that without any discord, right? Oh, I'm more important than him. How did he go in first? I'm more important than him. How did he get 10 minutes more with the Buddha than me? We see all this happening, right? But he dealt with all that. So again, the bridge. And when we look at Venerable Ananda, one thing to keep in mind is that when we look at Venerable Sariputta, Venerable Mahamogallana, Venerable Mahakassapa, his own half-brother, Venerable Anuruddha, all of these people have reached full enlightenment, right? They are arahants. Venerable Ananda, till the time of the Buddha, is just I shouldn't say is just a stream enterer, but he remains a stream enterer, right? So there are many instances where he comes across as this very human character. Upekha is one thing that's not very evident in certain situations with Venerable Ananda, especially when you read the scriptures and when you read the stories around him. And that's what makes him so, to the reader today, that's what makes him so kind of lovable, so relatable, is that he was human and very, very humane. When Venerable Sariputta passes away, he says, the world has gone dark. The Dhamma that has always nourished me fails to nourish me. I don't know what's going on. I find no footing. The Buddha has to console him. When the Buddha attains Mahaparinibbana, again he says, my companion Sariputta is gone. My master, the Buddha, is gone. Now the only friend that I have that can compare to both of them is mindfulness of the body. And hence, I am like a bird that returns to its nest, sitting all alone and meditating on the retreat. That's how he describes his state of mind after the Buddha's Mahaparinibbana. And there are many stories, a few stories where his kind of fallibility becomes very apparent. Now, there are lots of instances where Venerable Mahakassapa and Venerable Ananda have interacted. Venerable Mahakassapa has admonished Venerable Ananda, but I'm going to hold that off till next week. But a couple of stories is that at one time, the Buddha is sick, right? It's not the time for meals. It's actually early in the morning. And the Buddha is suffering from wind in the stomach. Now, on an earlier occasion, there was a certain type of gruel that the Buddha took, and it relieved him of this condition. So, as his attendant, out of all his love and compassion, Venerable Ananda prepares this gruel and takes it to the Buddha. The Buddha says, "No, Ananda, this is not right. A monk shouldn't be cooking, right? And not only are you cooking, but it's also the wrong time of the day, and you can't offer me food." So it shows a very human response. It's not the response of someone who thinks about the Vinaya, thinks about the rules. He's just spontaneous. He's just so loving, so caring, so compassionate that he cooks himself and he takes it to the Buddha. Then another example is how everyone's going on alms round. And when we go on alms round, traditionally, you have to have all three robes on. Venerable Ananda forgets his double robe, his Sanghati. So he just has his lower robe and his Chivara, his upper robe, and he goes out on alms round, and all the monks tell him, "Venerable Ananda, what is this? You're coming out without your double robe." Venerable Ananda says, "I'm sorry, I forgot." Right? Now, for someone who can remember 84,000 teachings, for him to forget his Sanghati is it's so endearing. It's so, and this happens, right? It happens all the time. Just so these are examples where Venerable Ananda's human nature comes out. And again, the ultimate second. There are a couple of instances where there is some discord within the Sangha. And he, along with Venerable Sariputta, especially, there's one example where there's a monastery in Kosambi, and there's a dispute there. There are two senior monks who live in the same monastery. One monk is an expert in the Vinaya. The Vinaya is the monastic rules, and the other monk is an expert in the Dhamma, in the teachings. So there's something silly that one monk does, and the other monk says, "Oh, you shouldn't have done this. You've broken a rule." Then the other monk says, "How can I break a rule? I'm the expert when it comes to rules. I couldn't have broken the rule." And then they start arguing. Then obviously, when teachers start arguing, their students get pulled into it as well. So all of the disciples start fighting. And the Buddha keeps telling them, "Guys, don't fight. This is very, very unseemly, unsightful. Shouldn't be doing this. Stop this." And they keep fighting. Finally, the Buddha gives up, and he says, he just gets up and leaves, goes to his kuti, cleans up his kuti, then goes off into the forest, because he's just sick and tired of these monks squabbling for no reason at all. And then it falls to Venerable Ananda, along with Sariputta, to kind of admonish all the monks, settle the dispute, get the monks to make amends to one another. Then the Buddha comes back. So a few instances like that. The time when Devadatta leads all of his disciples and leaves the Buddha and tries to create a schism, tries to break the Sangha, along with Sariputta and Mahamogallana, Ananda goes along. Venerable Ananda goes, and he kind of makes sure that Sariputta and Mogallana are effective in getting all these monks back. And so the Buddha really relies on it. And of course, being the Buddha's attendant, not only is he the Buddha's attendant, he's also the Buddha's cousin. He's the same age as the Buddha, so they can relate very well together. So they must have had a really, really tight bond. And usually this would have led to a lot of jealousy. But till the time the Buddha is alive, none of this comes to the fore. So Venerable Ananda is credited with this capacity to do his job well, and at the same time, not create any enmity with anyone, right? So he was a friend to all. He was well loved. And he was also a consummate diplomat. He had to deal with King Pasenadi. He had to deal with King Ajatasattu. He had to deal with so many of these really, he had to deal with billionaires like Anathapindika. He had to deal with all of these monks who were much higher than him in attainment, like Mahakassapa and Sariputta and Moggallana. And yet he performed his task with the utmost diplomacy. Right? There's this one story where King Ajatasattu sends his minister Vasakara to tell the Buddha that he's going to attack the Vajjian people. And Venerable Ananda is standing there fanning the Buddha. And the Buddha turns to Ananda and says, "Oh, Ananda, Ajatasattu wants to attack the Vajjiyans. What do you think?" So Venerable Ananda says, "Oh, I don't think that's a very good idea, because the Vajjiyans live with a lot of sila. You know, they are truthful, they keep the precepts, they're very respectful to women, they honor the gods and deities, they honor true mendicants and priests and teachers. There are 7, I don't remember all 7, but there are 7 reasons. Oh, they meet often and they come to decision in concord and in harmony. That's the most important thing." So then, you know, Venerable Ananda tells Vasakara all these strengths of the Vajjiyans. Then Vasakara thinks to himself, and he tells the Buddha, "Oh gosh, because of these 7 things, Ajatasattu will definitely fail. This endeavor will definitely fail. Even if they were consummate in one of these strengths, even then this endeavor will fail. So we better not attack them." And he says the only way we can attack them and win is through treachery or through getting in and breaking them, creating some kind of rot from within. And so Venerable Ananda actually averts this huge war that's about to happen, averts the annihilation of this whole community of people, this clan of the Vajjiyans. And then, of course, later on, after the death of the Buddha, the Vajjiyans, their sila drops, and Ajatasattu then attacks and vanquishes and annihilates them. That's a different story. But Ananda, if it weren't for his diplomacy, or rather his diplomacy won the day, averted a war. So now we come to how he actually serves the Buddha. So one day the Buddha assembles the Sangha, and I'm sure we all know the story. It would be remiss if the story wasn't mentioned. So the Buddha calls the Sangha and he says, "I'm now getting on in age. Right? I'm now 55 years old, and I need an attendant I can absolutely rely on and trust. I've had many attendants before. A lot of monks have attended to me. But now I need someone who I can trust and rely on 100%. So then everyone in the Sangha volunteers, right? Anyone who's there volunteers, except for Ananda. It's very similar to the story of how Mahamoggallana vanquishes Nandopananda. Venerable Ananda is quiet. He doesn't volunteer. He just stays to one side. And the Buddha keeps saying no to everyone who volunteers. Then the only other person left is Ananda. So the Sangha goes to him and says, Venerable Ananda, you're the only one left, so why don't you be the attendant? So he says, well, I can be the Buddha's attendant, but I have 8 conditions. And if those conditions are not met, I will not take on this responsibility. So the Buddha says, okay, what are your conditions? So he says, well, Venerable Sir, if you get any robe, if you're offered any robe, you should not give it to me. Any alms food that is offered to you, you should not offer that to me. Any lodging that is donated to you for your use, you should not give it to me. And finally, if you're invited to any house for a teaching or a meal or a blessing, you shouldn't include me in that invitation. Then the Buddha nods and he says, I have 4 more conditions. Those conditions are, if I get a robe, I should be able to offer you that. No, if I get an invitation, I should be able to transfer that invitation to you. He doesn't say robe, he says invitation. And then he says, if there's a dwelling that's offered to me, I can offer that to you. If there are people who come from different parts of, they travel from far away, I should have the authority to bring them into your presence. If I have a doubt regarding the Dhamma, I should be able to come to you at any time and clarify it. And finally, if you give a teaching and I'm not there, you'll have to repeat it word for word to me. And the Buddha says, wow, okay, great. All of these are accepted. You be my attendant. So with these 8 conditions that the Buddha agrees to, Venerable Ananda then starts. And his core strengths are these, all the things that we saw on the previous slide, his diplomacy, his dedication, his way with people. And many times, his teaching style is considered to be quite similar to Mahakachana, where the Buddha would say something pithy, and he'd give a really brief teaching, and then he'll get up and leave, go into his kuti, either to rest or to meditate. And then all of the Sangha would then approach Mahakachana or Venerable Ananda and ask them to elaborate, to elucidate on this pithy statement of the Buddha. And finally, of course, he was not just the Buddha's Kalyanamitta, his noble friend, but this idea of Kalyanamittata was extended by him to the entire Sangha, to the lay people, to bhikkhus, to bhikkhunis, upasakas, upasikas, everyone. So now we come to a few interesting stories, and I couldn't find pictures for some of them. So the first story that's really inspiring, this is something that added to Ananda's renown by huge measure, is that when Devadatta is really, really jealous of the Buddha, he tries many things, right? He tries to cause a schism. He even tries to kill a Buddha by pushing down a boulder. So at another time, he releases this wild elephant called Nalagiri when the Buddha and his monks are going out on alms run. So this mad elephant comes charging. Venerable Ananda goes and stands in front of the Buddha, protecting him. Blocking him, stands between this charging elephant and the Buddha to protect the Buddha. He was ready to sacrifice his life for his teacher and for his master and for the one he served. So the Buddha then tells him, Ananda, move back. Doesn't listen. Ananda, move back. Doesn't listen. Third time, Ananda, move back. Ananda is still standing there. So he uses his psychic powers and gently moves Ananda to the back. And then he has this surge of metta. He just blasts Nalagiri with metta. And the elephant calms down. The elephant's mind calms down and it becomes quiet. That speaks of Venerable Ananda's ability to self-sacrifice, just throw his own life to protect his teacher, protect his master, his Lord. Then another really interesting story is, like all kings, King Pasenadi had a harem. And because because the harem was filled with his concubines, these ladies were not allowed to leave the palace. So this picture in the middle, this lady who's sitting is Pasenadi's chief consort or queen, Samavati. And the lady in front of her is a slave woman called Kujuttara. And Kujuttara is the slave girl who's allowed to do chores for the women in the harem. So Samavati actually sends Kujuttara to the monastery where the Buddha is staying to listen to the Buddha's teachings. And Kujuttara would come back and relate the teachings to the women in the harem. And it is said that by doing this, Kujuttara dropped the first 3 fetters and entered the stream. Now Kujuttara, because Kujuttara has been teaching these ladies the Dhamma, their faith increases, their Saddha flowers, blossoms. So they make a request of King Pasenadi to request the Buddha to either the Buddha come and teach the women, or he delegates one of his monks to come and teach the women of the harem. So King Pasenadi thinks about it and says, yeah, I don't think the Buddha will come. Who do you have in mind? So all the ladies say, oh, Venerable Ananda. We want Venerable Ananda to come because he's the foremost in memory. He is there. He listens to all of the Buddha's teachings. Even if he's not there, the Buddha repeats all his teachings to him. So we want Venerable Ananda to come. So King Pasenadi goes and requests the Buddha, please, can you send Venerable Ananda to teach the ladies of my harem? Venerable Ananda agrees. The Buddha agrees and then asks Venerable Ananda. Venerable Ananda says, yes, I'll go. So he goes and he's teaching. He goes a few times. And during one of his visits, he notices that all of the women of the harem they're afraid. They can't pay attention. They're preoccupied. So Ananda asks them, what's going on? Why are you all aflutter? So the ladies say, well, one of the crown jewels has been stolen and we can't find the thief. So Ananda says, okay, I'll sort this out and then you can all listen to the teaching with a heart that's free and liberated and at peace and calm. So he goes to King Pasenadi and says, you go out to your garden and erect a tent. Okay, no one from the outside should be able to see what's going on in that tent. In the middle of that tent, put a large pot of water and let people go in and come out. Let everyone go in and come out. And, whoever the thief is, without fear of punishment, can drop the crown jewel into that pot. We have no way of finding out who did it. King Pasenadi is very happy. He says yes. And the same thing is done. The crown jewel is recovered. And then the ladies are able to listen to the Dhamma from Venerable Ananda with a heart that's free of fear. Now, it's also very, very interesting to note that exactly the same thing happened with Ajahn Chah at Wat Nong Papong. In that one of the monks, someone there in the monastery had misappropriated some funds. There was cash missing. Then this was brought to Lumpu Cha's attention. And the monks, some of the monks said, oh, we should go and search. Lumpucha was really not for that. So he called the whole monastery together, monks, Siladhara, monks, mechis, lay people. And he said, okay, all of you go back to your kutis and then take a rag or a piece of paper and then make like a package and then come and drop it. There'll be a kuti where there's a basket. No one can see what's going on in that kuti. You just go and drop your parcel there. And the same thing happened. All the money that was stolen was recovered. Beautiful. Really, I mean, that kind of, what do they call it now? Blue sky thinking or something, out of the box thinking or whatever it's called. Like this kind of skill in dealing with, so it's actually correcting the situation, but it's not punitive. It's rehabilitational, but not punitive. So the person who's actually done that transgression or that whatever, that crime or whatever you want to call it, will then be made to think, oh my God, look at how well this has been handled. Look at how poorly I have behaved. And hence course correction without any penalty. And of course, one of the things that Venerable Ananda is most famous for, famous in a lot of eyes, infamous in some eyes, is that he actually started the Bhikkhuni Sangha. So Venerable Mahapajapati Gautami, who is the Buddha's foster mother, who's also the sister of Maya Devi, the Buddha's mother, walks all the way from Kapilavatthu to Vesali. So the Buddha is visiting Kapilavatthu, and she asks him, please, I'd like to be a nun in your order. Please give me the higher going forth. I would like to practice. Buddha says, no, don't be too enthusiastic, Pajapati, Mahapajapati, this is not the time. She asks him 3 times, he refuses 3 times. And then he leaves and comes to Vesali. Mahapajapati Gautami follows him to Vesali. And she's standing there at the gateway of the monastery. Venerable Ananda is walking by and he sees her. Now, this is Venerable Ananda's aunt as well. So he sees her, her feet are swollen, her robes are dusty, she looks tired and haggard, and she's weeping. And Ananda, this really touches Ananda, right? And he says, Aunt, what's going on? Why are you in this state? And she tells him, well, I wanted the higher going forth. I wanted the Buddha to start a nun's order. The Buddha hasn't acquiesced. And so I'm quite sad. And I've walked all this way just to see if he'll relent. So then Venerable Ananda, here's again the diplomat, right? His brilliant way of approaching things. So he goes to the Buddha and says, oh Lord, do you think women are fit for the holy life? The Buddha says, of course they are. So Ananda says, but do you think they can reach all the 4 levels? Like, can they reach stream entry? Can they become once returner, non-returner, arahant? Buddha says, of course they can. Sure they can. Then Venerable Ananda says, oh Lord, isn't Mahapajapati Gautami your aunt? Wasn't she your nurse? When your mother died, didn't she feed you with milk from her own breast? So now that you say that women have the same spiritual capacity, and Mahapajapati Gautami has raised you, nurtured you, taken care of you, protected you, shouldn't you be giving her the going forth? Now the Buddha realizes, oh gosh, I'm caught. I can't escape from this. No one else could have done this except Venerable Ananda, because he knew that his saddha was so strong that he could approach the Buddha as a friend, as a cousin, And this is actually, he suggests to the Buddha, look, you owe this lady a debt. You've got to pay it back. This is how you got to do it. And the Buddha says, yes, fine. And he gives Venerable Mahapajapati Gotami the going forth with some safeguards. And then there is an order of nuns that are established. After establishing the order of nuns, Venerable Ananda takes it upon himself to see to their spiritual well-being, to their material well-being. So he goes and he teaches them the Dhamma. And so he's really, really cares for the Bhikkhuni Sangha. So all this is going on, and there's one nun who actually falls in love with Venerable Ananda. And her name is not mentioned, but she's at this nunnery in Kosambi. And one of the rules in the Bhikkhu Patimokha is that a monk who's of 20 reins, who is pleasing to the nuns, if they invite him to go and teach, he should go and teach, right? Well, he should teach. They should come to him to learn. But if that nun is sick, then the bhikkhu is allowed to go to the nun to teach her. Those are the rules. So this nun feigns illness and she sends a message to Venerable Ananda. Oh, I'm sick. Can you please come and teach me the Dhamma? And the intention is to seduce Venerable Ananda. So Venerable Ananda goes and he very quickly assesses the situation, realizes what's going on. And he starts giving her a desana. He says, oh, this body of ours, it doesn't go straight to Asubha Bhavana and doesn't attack the lust straight on. Again, highly diplomatic. He says, oh, this body, you know how it grows up? It grows up because of nutriment, because of pride, and because of desire. But nutriment is actually beneficial for the holy life. So you take nutriment, and using nutriment, you transcend nutriment. Right? Nutriment becomes a support for the holy life. Similarly, pride, I think ambition is a better word. You want to achieve things that people who are better than you have achieved. So you use that ambition to transcend ambition. You use that ambition to spur you on to progress in the holy life. And finally, desire. You take desire, you study it, and you use desire to transcend desire by converting that raga into chanda, converting that desire into a wholesome desire, the desire for nibbana. But then there's also a fourth cause for this body to arise, and that is sexual intercourse. That is when the bridge to nibbana is broken. If a serious monastic involves himself or herself in sexual intercourse, then the bridge to nibbana is broken. So the moment this nun listens to this teaching, wisdom arises. Dhamma dasana. She sees the Dhamma and she prostrates in front of Venerable Ananda and she says, please forgive me. This is very wrong on my part. This was my intention. Venerable Ananda tells her, please not to worry. It's very healthy that you've admitted your wrongdoing because that's a way of relieving yourself of the guilt. So the approach is so like he doesn't admonish her. He doesn't rub lust in her face and say, this is horrible. How could you do this? You're supposed to be a nun. But no, the approach is one of such kindness, so much karuna, so much understanding. And finally, the unrest at Kosambi, that was the story I shared a little while ago. How Venerable Ananda actually makes peace between these two groups of arguing monks. So now let's look at some things that Venerable Ananda has actually left behind, or things that we do in Buddhist culture today that are the results of Venerable Ananda or his legacy. So the first thing is that a lot of monasteries have these huge Bodhi trees, and people sit around them and meditate. That becomes a Bodhi tree shrine. And this tradition was actually started by Venerable. So in Jetavana, once Anathapindika builds Jeta's park, and he offers it to the Sangha, the Buddha is there, spends a lot of time there, and he's teaching there. But very often he goes out on teaching tours, or he goes out on retreat. So Ananda says, okay, let's plant a Bodhi tree here, which is the sign of the Buddha's enlightenment, and let this be a shrine. So he gets a sapling from Bodh Gaya, and he plants it in Savatthi, and that's called the Ananda Bodhi tree. And a lot of saplings of that tree are found in Sri Lanka and Thailand and all that. That is the Bodhi tree that was supposed to have been at Jetavana. So this concept of Bodhi trees as shrines was started by Venerable Ananda. Now, as the Sangha was gaining popularity, Sangha was gaining a lot of financial and material support, a lot of lay people would offer costly robes to the monks and the nuns. The Buddha wanted to standardize this, right? And so he was gazing out one day, and he saw the rice fields of Magadha. And he thought, wow, this is a very pleasing sight. So he called Ananda and he said, Ananda, can you design a robe that looks like the rice fields, the paddy fields of Magadha, of the Magadhan country? So then Venerable Ananda actually comes up with the pattern for the robe that the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis wear. And that's, so if you look at that picture, there's a broad rectangle, and the rectangle is bordered. So those borders are supposed to be the dikes in the fields, and the smooth area is supposed to be the fields itself. So even today, if you go to a paddy field, you see this huge field, but then it has dikes in the middle. These dikes are used for irrigation. It's also used for farmers to walk from one part of the field to another. It has a few uses, right? So Venerable Ananda comes up with the design of the robe using the kusi and the atta kusi, what we call the dikes, and the area between the dikes. If you've been to any Paritta blessing in any monastery in Theravada, I'm not sure what they do in the northern schools, but in the southern schools, Burma, Thailand, and that's the picture of Lumpur V. This was taken 2 birthdays ago. No, probably even last birthday. I'm not sure. It was a fairly recent birthday celebration. So we all chanted parittas, and we had a hand washing ceremony for him. So at the end of the paritta chanting, usually the water that's kept there is supposed to imbibe all of these good vibes of the chanting, all the metta that's generated by everyone in the room, all the good wishes and lovely thoughts and all of that. So that's called lustral water. So then the senior monk will pick up an aspergillum and will then splash water on everyone who's assembled there. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to be part of. It's this splash of cool water on your face. Beautiful blessing. So Venerable Ananda is the person who started this tradition. So when he went to Vaisali, and there was this kind of almost like a plague that was there in Vaisali, he chanted the Ratana Sutta, and while he was chanting the Ratana Sutta, he filled his bowl, his alms bowl, with water, and then he sprinkled that on everyone so that these people get rid of diseases. So that's how the tradition of Parita blessing, this water blessing at the end of Paritas start off. Because his most famous legacy is the Bhikkhuni Sangha and, of course, the Sutta Pitaka itself. Because if it weren't for his memory and his organizational skills, we wouldn't have had the Sutta Pitaka. Not only there's a lot to cover, so I might be going a little slow. So not only were the Buddha and Ananda really, really close, but Ananda had this way of sharing with the Buddha some things that he saw and encouraging the Buddha to form similes around that and use those as similes in his teaching. So the picture of the archer, one day Venerable Ananda is out and Venerable Ananda and the Buddha are Kshatriyas. They come from the warrior clan. So obviously when there's an archer, Venerable Ananda would have been kind of attracted to see what's going on. So he sees this archer displaying his skill. He's really impressed. So he comes to the Buddha and says, Venerable Sir, I just saw this archer. He did this amazing feat with his arrows. And is there something that you could relate to this, to what I saw? Can you relate this in terms of the Dhamma? So the Buddha says, of course, Ananda, of course I can. If you took a human hair and if you were to split it 7 times, and then if an archer were to split that 7 times split hair with his arrow, that would be easier than penetrating and understanding the 4 Noble Truths. So it's a beautiful simile that the Buddha comes up with. And then on another occasion, Venerable Ananda is walking around and he smells all these beautiful flowers. And he comes to the Buddha and he says, Venerable Sir, I had this lovely field of flowers and all these different types of flowers, and their fragrance was so sweet. Which do you think is the sweetest fragrance? So the Buddha says, well, Ananda, the sweetest fragrance is the fragrance of Sila. And not only is that the sweetest fragrance, but the fragrance of flowers is carried by the wind. The fragrance of Sila can go even against the wind. It does not rely on the wind for its fragrance to spread. That's how powerful Sila is. And then, of course, this picture at the bottom right, one of my favorite photographs, these 2 little monks walking. Venerable Ananda goes to the Buddha and says, oh, Venerable Sir, don't you think that Kalyana Mittata, noble friendship, is half of the holy life? Buddha says, no, Ananda, don't say that. It's not half of the holy life. It's the holy life in its fullness, in its completion. And he says, if it weren't for Kalyana Mittata, how many of these disciples would have come and seen the Tathagata and accepted them as their best friend? And how many of them would have had the saddha to listen to him and to train with him? And then, of course, finally, another beautiful simile is that, again, Venerable Ananda is going on alms round, and he sees this very rich Brahmin called Januson. And Janusonin is out on his chariot. And the description of the chariot is that everything is white. So the horses are white, the reins are white, the charioteer is wearing white clothes, the passenger Janusonin is wearing white clothes, the wheels are white, and in the light of the sun, it's just sparkling. It's so splendorous. And everyone who sees it says, oh, this is the Brahmayana. This is the vehicle of Brahma. Yana is vehicle. Brahma is the Brahma God. They say, wow, this is the vehicle of Brahma. This is the Brahmayana. So then Venerable Ananda goes to the Buddha and says, I saw this wonderful chariot today. It was so spectacular. And everyone was saying that this is the Brahmayana. So, Venerable Sir, is there something in the Dhamma that talks of the Brahmayana? So the Buddha looks at him and says, if you look at the Dhamma Ananda, not only does it talk of the Brahmayana, but it talks of a yana that excels even the Brahmayana. And that is the Noble Eightfold Path. And he says, Saddha and Panya are the horses that draw this chariot. Hiri and Otapa are the brakes. The reins are the mind, the chitta. The charioteer is mindfulness, sati. The seat of the chariot is sila. The axle of the chariot is samadhi. Balance of the chariot is upekha. The wheels of the chariot are virya, energy. The weapons in the chariot are love, metta, and avihingsa, non-harm. And finally, the armor is patience and what else? One more thing, kanti. Anyway, it will come. So the sutta is also referenced in the end, but it's just so beautiful how he takes this image of a chariot and he brings in the Noble Eightfold Path and he brings in all of these qualities and says, look, this is what the Dhamma is giving you. It's a vehicle that's even superior to the vehicle that the Brahma gods ride in, right? Or transport themselves in. So again, beautiful, beautiful, very inspiring kind of vignette. So then we see, Venerable Ananda's conversations with the Buddha. We see how dedicated Venerable Ananda is. But what was the Buddha's attitude towards Venerable Ananda? Now, there was this one occasion. Now, Venerable Ananda was supposed to be an expert tailor, right? He could make all these different seams and he could make really, really nice robes. And so one evening, there's this monastery in which the Buddha and Venerable Ananda are staying in, and there's a large group of monks. So Venerable Ananda collects all of these monks and he has a sewing evening with them, right? And sewing is a kind of a communal activity. So before long, everyone starts chatting and laughing. It becomes very convivial. It becomes like a social occasion. Then the Buddha comes and admonishes Ananda, and he says, someone who's indulging in such kind of frivolity is not deserving of the Tathagata's praise. And then he also tells Venerable Ananda, look, Ananda, you are my attendant. You are my student. You are someone who's close to me. So I will not handle you like a potter who handles an unburnt pot, right? So what the simile here is that anyone who's done pottery, a lump of clay is placed on the potter's wheel, and then a pot is made, and the potter has to very delicately lift that pot and place it so that the pot doesn't get dented, so that the wet clay doesn't break up, and then it's fired. Now, after it's fired, the pot is then taken and it's tested for strength, right? And in India, you see this all the time. You want to go buy a pot in the market, the potter will take the pot and he'll hit it like this to demonstrate that it's strong, that it's not going to break, and that it's been fired well. So the Buddha says, I'm not going to handle you in a very delicate manner. It is the strong that can take the striking. So I will definitely be very strong in my admonishment to you, or admonishments to you, right? Tough love. So that's one of the attitudes that the Buddha had towards Venerable Ananda. But on the other hand, he was extremely appreciative and he had immense attitude for Ananda. There's this one time when this monk called Udayan actually corrects Ananda on something, saying that, oh, you're not able to understand this fully because you're just a stream enterer. And the Buddha says, no, Udayan, don't say that. Even though Venerable Ananda has not completely walked the path, it is very, very rare to find one as established in wisdom as Venerable Ananda. And the Buddha, not once, but in 2 places in the suttas, actually tells Venerable Ananda as an encouragement that Ananda, you might be a stream enterer now, but in this very lifetime, you will attain arahantship. Right? So he says that in the presence of Venerable Udayan. He takes Ananda aside and says, don't say that, Udayan. His wisdom is second to none. And in this very lifetime, he is going to break all the fetters. Then in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, he says it again to Ananda. Ananda, very soon you're going to break all your fetters. So that's how he encouraged Ananda. So between gratitude and encouragement, and of course, there was a lot of trust. And this trust is exemplified by all of the tasks that were delegated to Venerable Ananda by the Buddha. So what does the Buddha say about Venerable Ananda? So all the Buddhas of the past had had such excellent attendants, and all Buddhas of the future will have them too. His skill in dealing with people is admirable. If a company of bhikkhus goes to see Ananda, they become joyful on seeing him. And if he speaks to them on the Dhamma, they are made joyful by his discourse. And when he becomes silent, they are disappointed. Right? It's not like, oh, thank God that the desana is over. The people, they're thirsting for more. You know? And so it is also with the bhikkhunis, with the laymen, laywomen. The assembly taught by Ananda is always overjoyed, and everyone wants to listen to him further. Ananda has such remarkable, extraordinary popularity as one otherwise finds only in a world monarch. High praise indeed from the Buddha. So we then fast forward a little bit. The Buddha has now attained his Mahaparinibbana. And Venerable Ananda is bereft. He says, Sariputta is gone, Buddha is gone. Now the only thing that compares to their friendship is mindfulness of the body. So he takes that as his chief contemplation, and he's practicing. So he goes, Mahakassapa tells him, there are woods in the Kosala country, go there and practice in the woods, be secluded. So he goes to the woods. But again, the people of Kosala are quite distraught because King Pasenadi has just died. Within a year, King Pasenadi, Venerable Sariputta, Venerable Mahamogallana, and most recently the Buddha, all of them die within a year. So they're all really distraught. So they keep coming and they want to be consoled by Ananda. And Ananda keeps consoling them. Then finally, he hears a divine voice that tells him, look, why are you engaging yourself with all this? You've got to practice. You've got to break your fetters. And as this is going on, the story of this other monk who says that, oh, now the Buddha is dead, we can do whatever we want, then spurs Venerable Mahakassapa into action. And he calls for a meeting of 500 learned monks so that all the teachings can be preserved for posterity, the suttas and the Vinaya. And everyone says it's mutually agreed that Venerable Upali will chant the Vinaya Pitaka, the monastic rules for the nuns and the monks. Venerable Ananda will chant the Sutta Pitaka, all the teachings of the Buddha, because by his own admission, in his memory, he has the 84,000 teachings. Now his half-brother, Venerable Anuruddha, now they were total opposites. Venerable Ananda was outgoing, he was personable, he was always upfront. Venerable Ananda was reserved, he was very introverted, he enjoyed seclusion, and so he was always away from the action, away from activity. So he wants to spur his half-brother on, and so he says, yes, Ananda should be invited, he must chant the suttas, but when we convene this council, Ananda must be an arahant. So now there's a deadline because all the bhikkhus agree. say, okay. So then Ananda puts forth a lot of energy, puts forth a lot of effort, and he's practicing. He, goes to the 4 foundations of mindfulness. He works with breath. He works with the body, and time goes on, and it's the last night. And that dawn, immediately after the dawn, the council is going to convene. Venerable Ananda investigates, and he finds that he still has not broken all the fetters. He practices feverishly. The desire for Nibbana is so strong. He wants to get enlightened. He has a deadline. And then it comes, the suttas say he puts forth so much of effort during that whole night. He's constantly walking and sitting. And then at one point he realizes, okay, there's just a short time remaining before dawn. This is probably not working. And he sits on his bed. And as he lifts his feet, and just about the time when his head is going to hit the pillow, he gets fully enlightened. All his fetters fall away. All his defilements fall off. Because in that moment of ease and in that moment of relaxation, he lets go of his craving for Nibbana. And so he becomes fully enlightened. Dawn, the whole council is convened, and then he demonstrates his enlightenment by appearing through the air and taking his seat. So everyone sees his psychic ability and they really congratulate him. So that's the story of Venerable Ananda's awakening. So even after he becomes awakened, so now the Sangha is convened, gathered. Venerable Ananda is the person who comes up with the phrase with which every sutta starts, Evang me sutang. And it's usually translated as, thus have I heard. But me sutang actually is even softer than that. It's not thus have I heard. This is what has been heard by me. Right? So there's an added level of softness to it. And because the Vinaya, so all the suttas start with Evang me sutang. This is what has been heard by me. Venerable Upali, when he starts chanting the Vinaya, he starts with Tena Samayen, at that time. Because Vinaya is something that deals with time and place, and it deals with actions that are appropriate to time and place. And hence, Venerable Upali says, Tena Samayen, at that time this happened. Because this happened, the Buddha then gave forth this rule, and hence we have to follow this rule. Right? So anyway, the Sangha is convened and the suttas have all been recited. The Vinaya Pitaka has been recited. And then finally what happens is the council then looks at Venerable Ananda and says, there are certain things that you've done that needs admonishment. Now, having spoken about Ananda, having listened to all of his stories, having listened to all of his conversations with the Buddha, these kind of accusations seem niggling, right? But the reason it's here is, I think, I could be wrong. The reason all of these are mentioned is particularly to portray Venerable Ananda's response to all of these, how he handled these with such humility, and how he places concord and harmony over his own reputation, his own good name, etc. So at the time the Buddha, at the time of the Buddha's Mahaparinibbana, there are 4 things that happen. One of the things is that the Buddha says, Ananda, after I'm gone, the Dhamma and the Vinaya will be your teachers. There will be no other teacher. And monks and nuns can decide to let go of some of the minor rules. right? Now, the Buddha is actually telling Ananda this on his deathbed. This is the very final evening of his Mahaparinibbana. Ananda is distraught. The Buddha is slipping away. Buddha says this. And so at the assembly, they say, look, you didn't ask for a clarification from the Buddha about what these minor rules are. We don't know what to let go of and what to keep. So let's just keep all the rules, right? And it makes sense. The Buddha has just passed away. You want to protect the Sangha. So instead of making any changes at that very moment, you say, no, let's continue. Let's go on as it's always been. And then we'll make changes later. But they accuse Ananda of, not seeking clarification. So Venerable Ananda humbly says, I'm sorry. At that moment, I just couldn't ask for clarification, right? So if it's a mistake, I would happily make amends. Then someone else says, oh, when you were making a robe for the Buddha, you actually stepped on the robe cloth. And that's a huge sign of disrespect. And after stepping on the robe cloth, you use the same robe cloth to make a robe for the Buddha. So Ananda he says, well, disrespect to the Buddha is the farthest thing on my mind, right? There's no way I can disrespect the Buddha. But if you feel that this is a transgression, I'm very happy to make amends. After the Buddha's funeral, what Venerable Ananda did was he allowed all the women who were present to pay respects to the Buddha's relics first. So now the monks at this gathering accuse him. You allowed the women to pay respects to the Buddha's relics first. So Venerable Ananda says, well, what's wrong in that? I actually wanted them to go home before it gets too late. If they travel in darkness, it's going to be dangerous for them. So out of compassion, I allowed the women to pay respects to the Buddha's relics first. And finally, during the evening, that last evening when they are at the Chapala Grove and at this temple, the Buddha actually tells Ananda that, if the Tathagata is requested, the Tathagata has the capacity to live till the end of the eon. Ananda listens to this, but it doesn't register. Buddha says it again. If invited, the Tathagata can willfully live till the end of the eon. Again, it doesn't register. The Buddha says it for a third time. It doesn't register. Then finally, the Buddha talks about a whole different thing. And then he says, it's now time for my Mahaparinibbana. Then Venerable Ananda makes a request. Oh, please, you shouldn't go now. You should wait. You should stay till the end of the eon. And the Buddha says, sorry, Ananda, the time has passed. I can't acquiesce now. So then the Sangha then accuses Ananda that, when the Buddha said this, you should have requested him to stay on till the end of the eon. Venerable Ananda says, well, what can I say? Mara took hold of my mind. I couldn't think. I had no capacity to comprehend what the Buddha was saying. And honestly, it's a cruel thing to ask of the Buddha. 80 years old, the man has been facing a lot of sickness. The body is disintegrating. At one point, he describes his body as a chariot that's falling apart, right? And to ask him to stay till the end of the eon is, a little selfish, to put it mildly. But anyway, they accuse Venerable Ananda, but he says, I'm sorry. My faculty of thinking was not functioning then. I was really distraught. And so all of these things are there just to illustrate Venerable Ananda's response to all of these accusations and how he handled it. So finally, after the Buddha passes away, Venerable Ananda lives for another 40 years, and he dies at the age of 120. And Venerable Ananda has always been one who never wanted to trouble others. He would always serve others. He would always go out of his way to provide service, but he would feel really, he would feel very strongly about himself being burdensome to anyone. So at the time of his Mahaparinibbana, he uses his psychic abilities, ascends into the air and bursts into flames. And all that remains are his bone relics, which are taken and then distributed to various stupas. So once he attains Mahaparinibbana, all the monks who are present get together and attach these 3 verses to the Ananda Theragatha. So of great learning, the bearer of the Dhamma, the guardian of the great seer's treasure, Ananda, the eye of the entire world, has attained final Nibbana. Of great learning, bearer of the Dhamma, the guardian of the great seer's treasure, Ananda, the eye of the entire world, was a dispeller of gloom in the darkness. The seer, who was so retentive, of keen memory and resolute, the elder, sustaining the true Dhamma, Ananda was a mine of gems. So with that, pay homage to Ananda, and we close for this evening. Thank you so much for your patience. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Yes, if anyone has a question, please feel to raise your hand and ask, and I'll help you unmute yourself. Well, Ven Amarasiri, it looks like there are no questions.
Great. Okay.
So,
well, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Ven Amarasiri. Before we sign off, I'll request the community to pay our respects to you by bowing 3 times. Thank you, Ven Amarasiri. We wish you a good week and happy Thanksgiving to you, to Lumpur, and to the entire community at Tasarna. And we look forward to seeing you again next Thursday.
Absolutely. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Enjoy the turkey. And yeah, see you next week.